Hello. I almost didn't start this on time because Sarah and I were just talking about her becoming a bodybuilder. Um, thanks for joining us, guys, to talk about Song of Solomon. I'm here with Sarah Hagi. She is a writer based in Toronto. How's Toronto right now?
Well, I'm looking out my window and it's just gray.
Cool.
And it rained a bit. Honestly, I don't feel like I'm even in a place, like where am I? I could be anywhere. I'm just, you know what I mean?
I mean, you're in
It's a very nihilistic way of it, but
I would kill to be in Canada right now, honestly, just to feel just because it's not here.
Okay, cool. Okay, not because it's Canada. I would love to go somewhere else.
Obviously. Not because of that. Should we check out the book?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say thank you so much for asking me to do this because I haven't, like so many people, I haven't been able to really focus on starting a novel and finishing it. And this was like exactly the push I needed. Especially because like when I started it, I was like, oh my God, like I told Kara I was going to read this and this is like just too smart for what my mind is capable of dealing with now. This is too beautiful. But I pushed through and, and I was so blown away. Like I've only read one Toni Morrison novel before. I've only read The Bluest Eye. And I've always wanted to read more of her, novels. And this was like truly, it blew me away. Like just, yeah, I loved how there was no, like I was reading it and I was like, oh, there's no one to really hate here. Like everything feels so well explained. Everyone's motivations felt just so real and understandable. Like some of you normally be like, yeah, I hate this person. Like they're messed up. They did this and this. And you're like, no, actually people do the things they do for these reasons. And I thought it was like the perfect kind of showing of that.
I feel like when you read a Toni Morrison novel, like I don't understand how you can read her books and not believe that she's the greatest American author in history, like to say the least. Like,
oh, absolutely. Again, I was truly blown away.
Let's talk first a little bit about Milkman, our boy.
Milkman.
Our Milkman. I mean, I kind of had when I was rereading the book, like I think I'd keep forgetting like what a brat he starts out as. Like it's funny because you were like, oh, there's no one to root against in the beginning. I was like, this dude sucks. And there's also a part, I don't know if you ever read like the forewords of books. Like I never do, but I
never do.
I know. Probably did. But I actually did this time because it was short. But Toni Morrison, like in the foreword, she wrote, "The challenge of Song of Solomon was to manage what was for me a radical shift in imagination from a female locus to a male one," which I think is like a really interesting thing about this book, that she did choose to have a male protagonist. And then especially one that's such a little brat in the beginning. And I think I saw something where she said, they were like, why did you write about a man? And she was like, a woman wouldn't have had to learn this much.
No, I agree. I was really thinking about it, especially, when Milkman and Guitar are having a lot of their conversations and just being like, oh, like, I feel like in a lot of ways, I feel like I haven't read a book with a male protagonist where I'm like, I'm seeing him learn and grow. Like I'm seeing things happen to him and him learn and grow. Like maybe he's still not perfect. And I feel like he still has a lot of his piece of shit qualities by the end. Yeah. But yeah, I was really like, oh, like this is truly like how men are. They're just thinking about themselves and then something has to happen and they're like, oh, wow, I'm really affecting other people, or like someone has to tell them off.
I mean, I'm going to read this. I feel like I will end up reading more from the book than I have like any other time, just because it's like the best writing a person has done. Yeah. But he said, so he's talking, this is like Milkman, and he was talking about, I believe, his mother, her confirmed eternal love of him, love that he didn't even have to earn or deserve, seemed to him natural. And now it was decomposing. He wondered if there was anyone in the world who liked him for himself alone, which is like an insane way to approach like being like it's a very like immature sort of childish approach of like of course she loves me, like I'm here and I exist, and like seeing the where he ends up, I think was, I don't know, a part to me was like I'm not rooting for this man to like figure it out, because it's at the sort of, it's going to be because he's being educated by women, and it's going to be because of the love of women. But like, what are you going to do?
Yeah, I mean, that was interesting. I mean, it's weird because it's kind of like so much of the novel is people, I feel like it's so hard talking about because I feel like everything I say is so much more basic than like the depth and like how well all of this is shown. But it's really like people finding their place in the world, and through all this, you know, generational baggage of this happening and that happening and that happening. And it was like the moment it kind of clicks for him, you're like, okay, like finally, like you finally get that you have this effect on people, that you're not just alone, that you're not just like, you know, like where he's just like, yeah, I need to leave. I need to just think about myself. I need to get out of here. I need to find myself. And him kind of realizing it has so much, who he is and has so much more to do with just him, and trying to kind of like close that part of his life up. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, it's really a novel about also like identity and finding your identity, and like very specifically the way that Black Americans have been stripped of that. Like you look at all of the names in the book, and those aren't like, no one's going by their government name. A lot of the characters are not. And the ways in which, like, when you strip people of their identities and their ability to know their history and know their family, and like, it's such a powerfully destructive thing. And like, you look at the way that, I mean, I was talking about this, and we were talking about this in the room I'm currently in, about like how when they brought over slaves, like on these ships, they would split up people who they'd gotten from the same like tribes or areas. So they were deliberately putting slaves together who did not speak the same language, and completely stripping them of their ability to communicate with each other and to like identify as part of like a tribe or a group or a family or any sort of collective.
Yeah.
And the way that that has trickled down, you know, I mean, just like the trauma of that is like, that feels like, I don't even, that alone is profound. And then the way that it trickles down. And so watching this character Milkman just trying to understand his own identity, like it's such an ordeal.
It is. And it's almost like he's so reluctant to do it at first. Like it just seems like he finds himself falling into this place where he's examining his identity and his father and where his father came from. And even like, you know, when he hears like, you know, the scene where he slaps his father, and then he hears that story from him about his mom and like the weird relationship his mom had with his grandfather, and then that clouding his judgment, and then hearing his mom's side of it, and what, you know, and I guess it's just kind of like, yeah, it's exactly what you said. It's like, there's so much showing how people want to be linked together just to have that kind of history in a way. And even with like, I feel like I'm jumping from different parts of the book, but even with guitar and the, you know, like being like, yeah, I'm a part of this group and I'm Sunday and I'm gonna, and just like kind of being like, okay, that's actually crazy. But also like, I do understand the need for someone to go to that extreme. And I think that's why I loved about it so much, is that she was so good at showing why, again, like why people are doing these things, and like the confusion people feel when they don't know things about themselves and just feel so stuck.
Yeah. I actually, when I was, so as a other aside, I had been rewatching Curb Your Enthusiasm. And so I'm watching the show, and I kept being like, honestly, Larry's kind of right a lot, which I was like, oh my God, what is wrong with me? Because like, that is not the takeaway from that show. And when I was like reading Guitar talking about, you know, like I was, you know, when he talks about like, okay, when they kill a Black person, we kill a white person. And I was like, I don't know, that I'm not mad at that necessarily. And then I had to be like, no, that's not, that is a theory, you understand. And then like in practice, it's not okay. But initially I was like, yeah, I mean, he has a point.
It's and it's like even him trying to divorce it from any real feeling of being like, it's not because of hate or love. You know what I mean? Like just kind of like we're just doing it to keep things even, and just being so I guess like just taking away that part of emotion where it's like almost like he won't even question anything when Milkman is like, okay, wait, this is crazy.
Right.
And just, like, it was also one of those points where I was like, oh, maybe Milkman isn't so stupid.
Right.
Because you're like, oh, like, yeah, if he's willing to do this, like, what else could he be capable of? And like, you're like, oh, Milkman's able to understand these things. And I loved those like glimmers of like, of me not truly hating him. He could be such a hateful character, I guess.
I think also like in the hands of a lesser writer, and we've seen this over and over again, where when it's Black people talking about, how we get free and liberation and fight racism and things like that, it's often presented in this dichotomy of like, you have Martin Luther King, you have Malcolm X, which is just like the most sort of simplistic version of it. And I think when you're looking at Guitar and Milkman having these conversations, it does seem like it's like, we're for peace and he's like the radical one, but like, that's not really what they're saying because, and in particular with, I think this gets us into like Making Dead a bit, this idea of Black capitalism and like that being what saves us. And it really is with so many things. It's like, neither of them are completely wrong.
No, it's true. It's totally true.
But at the same time, like there's that woman in the beginning when we start to realize that Making Dead is just like a really terrible person. And like in particular is this really like brutal landlord and he just wants money and he wants what white people have. And so there's like a Black woman who comes in, she's behind on rent, he's not understanding. And then she leaves and turns to her kids and she says, a nigger in business is a terrible thing to see, a terrible, terrible thing to see. And
it's kind of true.
It makes me think of like, like those, what do they call, like LLC Twitter?
Yeah, like billionaire mindset Twitter.
Yeah. Like, oh, are you going to take $1 million? Or are you going to take 1 hour with Jeff Bezos? It's like,
it's truly like the trolley problem for Black people. Where it's like dinner with Jay-Z or $100,000. And to me, it's like so crazy because exactly what you're saying, once you're reading more about Macon and you're like, wait a second, like he thinks he could just like buy his way out of Blackness, like the proximity to white capital and like what white people have. And it's like, it persists. Like that is seen in so many ways. Like, I mean, like just like Jay-Z, there we go. Where it's like,
why didn't you buy a building in Dumbo 20 years ago? You'd be rich now. It's like, okay.
And I mean, it's like, you see so many people, I guess in so much of the novel, it's people trying to take their way out, like trying to find ways to get out of what they have in a sense. Like even his sister, going to school, studying abroad, like all this stuff she did to make her make herself marriageable. And then being like, well, a man doesn't want a woman who is too educated or this or that. And you're like, yeah, still kind of feels the same way.
The problem that he runs into is like, and I think this is the problem that a lot of, because there's a lot of validity to the idea of like the economics of that being like a useful tool against racism. Like you see that with like something like Tulsa, where it's like, yeah, they burned it to the ground because they knew this shit. All of these Black people owning businesses and having their own banking system. Like they knew that was dangerous and they burned it to the ground and murdered a bunch of people. So it's not completely wrong.
No.
But I think the problem that you see with someone like Megan's character is it's still just an emulation of white capitalism. And that is a destructive thing we see over and over again. It reminded me too of, I don't know if you've read this book, The Power.
No.
But it's like about, I can't remember if like the women like get this power or if it's sort of like ignite. I think it like ignites within them, but it's like basically this world where like women have this like gene and they become super, super powerful, but they become much more physically stronger than men. And spoiler a little bit, but they just start behaving really differently. And one of the things they start doing is like they start raping men.
Oh, wow.
And it just, the book, I liked the book, but it's really lost me there, because this idea that like, okay, if we lived in a world where tomorrow you were able to flip a switch and women were physically dominant to men, the idea that they would all start acting like men, I don't really believe. And I don't even think that's an interesting thought exercise.
No, I don't think so at all either. And I don't think, I mean, like, even if I just think about like myself, you know, just as an individual growing up and dealing with, you know, like racism and Islamophobia and all these things that were like, you know, not as overt in a lot of ways as some people have had it, but still have affected me in this very deep way. I never got solved, and I never felt better with the proximity to whiteness or being like white people, or, you know, trying to, I don't know. Like, to me, it's kind of, it seems like that's something that is also shown in this. It's like Macon becomes this landlord, owns all this property, but it's like, but then when you see, and you see that he was never really accepted even by his own father-in-law, who was like a doctor and who had this proximity to whiteness. And you kind of see like how it's just like a losing game, even if you are successful, like you're never gonna be this.
The proximity to whiteness, if you're never gonna be white, isn't that helpful? Like, I think Andrew Chi and I talked about that last month a little bit when we were talking about the book Interior Chinatown in particular, because, you know, like this idea of like the model minority and Asians in America, and them being like the people of color who were the closest to white people and the proximity to whiteness. And Andrew and other friends of mine talking about like the realization they would have of like, oh, I'm not white. Like, being close to white, it does not matter. You will never be white. And you can trick yourself into believing that that proximity has value or it has safety. But like, when push comes to shove, they don't fuck with you. And like, when push comes to shove, you're not white. And it doesn't matter how, I mean, it's literally, I mean, hate to quote him these days, but it's like what Kanye said. He's like, even when you're in the Benz, you're still a nigga. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't, that is not the thing that's going to save everyone. And I don't know, it weirdly made me have a little bit of sympathy for Macon's character.
Just big time.
Because you're like, oh, you're never going to get this. This is never going to work out.
Yeah. And I mean, once, you know, towards the end of the novel, when you hear about his upbringing and how he was like, you know, really close to his father, and, you know, it's almost like a part of why he became this person was how he couldn't handle his grief, in a sense, of this life. This more like a more simple and probably a lot more full life he could have had if his dad, you know, wouldn't have been killed and would have raised him and his sister. And to me, it's kind of like, so, like, I don't know, like I'm like kind of thinking like, does a lot of this come out of so much pain people have dealt with, where it's like, I've been treated like this, like, you know, it's like something you hear, you know, success bros talk about a lot, where they're like, I was nothing before, now I'm something. And you're like, oh, you think that's like filling this hole, you know, but it's really not.
Well, it reminds me a little bit, like, I had this conversation with a couple people after watching Judas and the Black Messiah, because it was this idea of like, when Black people have gotten something, it gets taken from them. And like, again, like something like you have, what was it called? The farm that Macon's father had, Heaven's, I wrote it down, hold on. I didn't write it down. Lincoln's Heaven. Oh, yeah. Like that, you know, like that was taken from them. Tulsa was taken from them. Someone like Fred Hampton, who was like every civil rights hero we've ever had ends up getting taken from us. And it just fucks with your sense of value. You know what I mean? Like, if you know that like something can always be taken away, or if you don't necessarily value these things because you just know that like it's not gonna work out, or you're still gonna lose, it really shifts. It just shifts what you're willing to sort of give up and deal with and whatever. Like, and in that movie, that character not really being able to understand the value of Fred Hampton, and it's not 100% his fault. I don't think that movie was like an incredible character study of like why people made those decisions. But part of you is like, I don't know, if you can't see the value in Fred Hampton because no one like him has ever been allowed to live and to continue and build, like, you're not going to see yourself as like cutting down someone who would have changed the United States.
Yeah. And I feel like you kind of see that a bit with Guitar when he's explaining the group of men and how he's kind of like, you know, he's like willing to die. You know what I mean? He's like, my life won't like there's something he says. Oh, I wish I wrote it down, but it's something about his life being cut short and how like he truly does not care because it's going to happen eventually. And he's just kind of like, I don't care. This is what I'm willing to do. And it's not because I don't have love in my life or because I lack these things. It's just like what I'm willing to do to have something be done. And I mean, even like going to someone like Fred Hampton, like in the movie, he expresses this where he's kind of like, I'm willing to die. Like he knows what's going to happen. He knows what happens to men like him. And I was thinking about that quite a lot, just like how moving it was to hear that. And also I didn't read that chapter because I was going back and forth between listening to the audiobook and reading it. So like I would go out for walks and like listen to the book and then get back and read it. And it's Toni Morrison actually reading the book and hearing her say it. I was just like, oh my God. Like, it was just like, it was so much because you're just like, damn, like that's exactly what, that's what it is, you know?
I had a like damn feeling during that scene after Milkman and Guitar try to steal like the bag that's at Pilot's house.
Yeah.
And they, you know, they get caught, they get stopped by the police, and like Milkman being like all fucking surprised that he gets stopped by the cop. You're like, sir,
you're just like, what
is happening? But you know, when they talk about how Pilot comes in and does her sort of Aunt Jemima mammy thing.
Oh my God. Yes.
And them both being like ashamed. And I'm like, first of all, she just saved both of your asses. Like, fuck off. But also like, it brings me back to even the people, like even someone like Guitar, right? Who is this sort of civil rights activist person in the book. Someone might consider him a hero. He's trying to fight for the betterment of Black people. And like the not having the knowledge that like a lot of times, you know, when you look at like that sort of caricature of like the Sambo and the mammy, it's like Black people did that as a means of self-preservation.
Yes, absolutely.
We were smiling at the master so that the master was like, oh, they love me. We love you, master, da, 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 da. So that they didn't fucking kill them or like put them through more torture. And like, it's like a lack of, you know, again, because they're not reading books, it's like not having that knowledge and then hearing them discuss this woman.
They were like ashamed that.
Yeah. They were so ashamed of it. And it's like, that was like one of the few tools that Black people were able to develop to just survive. And I think it goes back again to just like the erasure of our history. And like, it's part of me is like, how do they even know? Because people, you know, like this whole book, like all of the history that's being discussed, you know, this family history is all oral. It's like, they didn't let us write anything down. Like, even like the descendants of slaves in America, it's like, God love you if you can trace your family back at all, because that like, it was deliberately erased from us. So it's like, it was such a sad moment because I was both like, I'm so mad that they would feel that way towards her. And also like, oh, you really don't know.
Yeah. And you're just kind of like, how do you think she survived this long? Like a woman with no husband, who's a bootlegger, who lives in this like, you know, this crazy weird life. Like, how do you think she got here? How do you think she's 70 years old and still able to stand tall? It's like she had to do things to survive. And it was crazy. I feel like that was so interesting to see. And then you're just kind of like, oh wow, like what is I want to know so much more about Pilot in this way, where you're just like, how did she even, and I'm finding more about how she got to where she was so interesting to me. But it was crazy. You're just like, you're ashamed. Like, what did you want to happen? You want to die in jail? Like
Should we, okay, that's a good segue. Should we talk about the ladies of Song of Solomon?
Oh, so sad.
I mean, brutal. Like, so brutal. I found myself too, like this time around, feeling really uninterested in Ruth. Like, not because I thought that like she was a bad person or any of this was her fault or whatever. I just was like, she's so sad. that like I don't know what to do with this. Like it's just like she's such a bummer.
So sad. So
that like I couldn't even think beyond like that's just really sad. Like it was hard for me to even like reflect on, you know, why she was the way she was and like the things that have happened to her, because it just felt like oh girl, like you just got super unlucky that you were alive then and like in this circumstance.
Yeah, it was a lot. You know, thinking about Ruth, and then like when you learn more about you know, Magdalene, is it Magdalene, and his other sister, you know, Corinthians, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like these women just basically had to just like they didn't have the options at all that he had, and you could see that, you know, when his sister really like reams him out for you know, snitching on Corinthians, and you're just kind of and like
Freddie the snitch, Milkman the snitch. I'm like, guys,
and you're just like, these women had it so rough that it's like in that sense, like you're kind of like, wow, Pilate's truly amazing that she forged this life on her own, that she just did what she wanted, and it wasn't, you know, like, you know, even when he first meets her and he's like, yeah, she looks shabby, but she's not like dirty. Like, you know, like the thing about, you know, her nails, like seeing the ivory of her nails, like she was unkempt, but she wasn't like destitute in that way. Like it was more like a choice she made to just live the life she wanted to. But yeah, his mom was so depressing.
So I think also, you know, that scene where Lena yells at him for snitching about Corinthians being with like, you know, the old like yard guy. I think if this book were written by a man, I think you would be very easy to read it and feel like, okay, here's this male protagonist. Because really, when Milkman, which I sort of believed, where he was like, I didn't tell my dad because I didn't want her to be happy. I was worried about who she was hanging out with. Like I was concerned that, you know, about her safety or whatever. And you're like, okay, even like if we choose to believe that, he seemed somewhat sorry about it later. And I think seeing the way all of these women like kind of taught him something and got him somewhere else, if it were written by a man, you'd be like, oh, you're just using women like the way that we see over and over again.
She's here to teach you a lesson.
Yeah. But I think the fact that it was not, like, you don't read those as, I think the destruction that he imposes on some of the women in the book, it's written in a way where you can't look away from it. And so, yes, he has learned from that, but in learning from that, he's ruined people's lives. And I think he does not get off for that in the same way that, like, if there was a man, if like, you know, Toni Morrison had written this book, maybe it would have felt that way.
Yeah. And even with like the whole thing with Hagar, you know, like I remember when I was reading it and the first time he sees her and it's like love at first sight, you know, he doesn't even see her face. Like she's just turned and he's like, he knows he loves her before she even turns around. And then how that whole concept is slowly destroyed throughout the novel when you see how he starts viewing her, because it's like, oh, she's too available to me. Yeah. Like once he gets older, he's just kind of, oh, sorry, I think I froze for a second. No. Oh, okay. My camera has frozen. I was like, what's going on? But yeah, you see that, you know, you see him once he, you know, starts understanding how the world works and everything. He's just kind of like, oh, she's so available to me. Like he describes her as like the third beer, or in the novel it's described as the third beer, you know, like you're just kind of like, yeah, it's in front of me. I guess I'll drink it. And seeing, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
And I guess just like seeing how this like pure love he has for someone is just like destroyed because he's a man and he realizes he can do these things and he can be this type of guy. He can be reckless with someone's heart to the point where she's like trying to kill him. And to me, it was just like, I at the beginning, I was like, oh, like a sweet love story, maybe. And then you see how it ends and you're like, oh my God. This is also very realistic.
Did I say Hagar? You know when like you're just saying it in your head?
Yeah, I don't know what you said. Pardon?
How did she say it in the audiobook?
Hagar,
okay.
Yeah.
So that's the name. So in The Bluest Eye, like obviously, like there's a lot, Toni Morrison talks about like, you know, beauty standards and like all the, a lot of shit. But there's this was the part from the book. Along with the idea of romantic love, she was introduced to another, physical beauty, probably the most destructive ideas in the history of human thought. And like, like watching Hagar die because of love and because of her belief in her inferiority of her physical beauty was like rough, brutal.
It was so brutal when you finally see her side of it. And like, it's not just like it's not even about him in a sense. It's like someone who you feel their devotion, and then out of nowhere, it's like a switch is flipped and you feel like nothing, this person makes you feel the world, and you're just kind of like, oh, like he did not care for her. No. Truly. And it really was so heartbreaking when, you see her go on that shopping spree and all that kind of stuff. And then,
well, I want to say this part from the book, because it was so interesting, one, to hear this being spoken by guitar. And so to hear it coming from a man's mouth to a woman, I thought was really interesting. It's also just like everything incredibly well written. But he said, you think because he doesn't love you that you are worthless. You think because he doesn't want you anymore that he's right, that his judgment and opinion of you are correct. If he throws you out, then you are garbage. You think he belongs to you because you want to belong to him. Hagar, don't. It's a bad word, belong, especially when you put it with somebody you love. Love shouldn't be like that. And he just, it keeps going and it's so incredible. But talking to this woman about valuing herself, and because it feels like the lecture, like the loving lecture that so many Black girls get, or like you hope that they get, which is like at least in like America and country, like in countries that aren't like Black countries, like everything you see is going to tell you that you're ugly. Like everything is going to confirm that you are not the ideal, that you do not have the features that white people have, and therefore you are not beautiful. And also as a woman, so much of your value is your beauty and your desirability. And so you don't have those traits. So you are undesirable as a human being. And like the work that we have, like the work that on an individual level you have to do to like combat that your parents have to do to like, make you
flashbacks. I'm like, oh God.
to let you know that isn't true. One, that your value is not tied up in what you look like. Your value is not tied up in a man being interested in you or loving you or wanting you. That the beauty standards that you see and sort of white America does not say anything about what you look like and like your own beauty. And it's like, it just was even, like I feel fine, but reading that felt like, oh, I need to read that so much. Like I need to read
the exact same way, especially because we have been talking about this stuff in like our own lives recently, you know what I mean? Yeah. Just like how we feel about ourselves and like all that like quarantine brain discussions about yourself that you have with your friends. And it, to me, like just even seeing that, I was just kind of like, oh my God, like we got so like screwed over.
We got
and I'm just like, how did I survive even being a teenager and being like, and truly thinking like, it's weird because like I never felt like I needed to be someone else.
Yeah.
I never felt like I needed to be white. I never wanted to be white. It was never that type of thing. But just understanding that like you are viewed as lesser and not as beautiful no matter what happens or no matter what you do, because that's just the way the world is. And fighting from like internalizing that in such a big way, and just like that not really like trying so hard for that to not impact my self-worth, and then reading those words and being like, tale as old as time. Like I know, like truly like damn, like no problem I have is original, but like ooh.
Well, I think that character too, like what makes it so affecting and like so emotional is like, you have this family of 3 women, and you have Pilate, who's just a really strong person. And really is that sort of like strong Black woman, matriarch, holding shit down person. Then you have her mother, Reba, who's just like kind of simple, isn't really like, and having Hagar, who is she's not a weak person. She just is like, the weight of all of these things have been crushing her. And it's not surprising that they crush people. You know, it's like,
No,
it's
not at
not
all.
surprising that women, you know, like women are like trying to lighten their skin. You're like, because everything around you is telling you that this is what needs to happen. And
Yeah.
so she felt like such a, it's why, like, I don't know, it felt like the slippery slope of like, it could be you. You could be someone who,
Truly, where you place everything on one person loving you, because if they don't, then everything bad about you is true.
yeah.
And
And
that's
if you're not getting love or affirmation somewhere else and you're feeling like you're getting it from there, like I think in particular, you know, if you live in a world that is like, we don't value Black people, we certainly don't value Black women, anything that feels like being valued, like of course you were going to hold on to that like so tightly, and you will die to hold on to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just like when that chapter kind of unfolded, it's like so much made sense about like, you know, like the kind of like not funny way, but like, you know, like she was trying to kill him and like blah blah blah,
Yeah.
and like how it was like it seemed kind of insane, you know, and then realizing like, oh, and I think that's what the book did so well. Like no one ever truly seems insane for no reason.
Yeah.
Like it's all.
I think that's the thing that in sort of wanting to do the book club and wanting people to read these books, like I think that's the valuable thing about reading fiction in particular, that's, you know, from the perspective of someone other than yourself, because it just like, we're all people who are just feeling things. And so your reactions to things are just a matter of like, feelings that you're having due to the situation that you're in that probably isn't your fault, but this is where we are, and like this is how I'm responding to it. And some people don't respond well, which is like understandable, or some people respond with anger or violence or whatever it is, but like feeling like, I get how you can get there. Like,
yes, exactly. That's exactly what it is.
I don't necessarily think that you should be killing a white person for every Black person, but you get how like, oh, they just bombed a church and 4 children died. To me, like that's the beauty of fiction, where you're like, I can understand how this character gets there and have just any empathy for it, whether or not I agree with it.
That's exactly it. And seeing that like throughout the novel, there's no form of real justice that anyone can have. Like, you know, it's explained like, you know, when Guitar's like, what, we're going to take them to court? Like, right. we're going to round them up and take them to a human rights court. Like, you know, like that's not possible for us. It's not possible for anyone to have, no person in that book has received any type of justice. And that's kind of like, in a way, like the myth of closure, of feeling like, even when it comes to heartbreak, like feeling like, oh, like this will end and something fair will happen. There's going to be justice in this man leaving me. There's going to be justice in my father dying, in this happening, and just knowing like nothing, like there's no such thing really when you think about it. There's nothing that will take away that pain and those feelings that drove all these people to do the things they did. Like it will never come about.
I think it's one of the things about like the history of Black people in America that I think is really important, when you realize the things that we've had to adapt to. Like if you're not going to get, I mean, it really like, you're not going to get this. And so how do you build something else? I mean, it's literally like, it's like the most obvious example, but you think of when they're like, okay, we're going to give you like the innards of this pig. We're not going to give you the good meat. And it's like, okay, we're going to figure out a way to make this taste good. Here's rotten fruit. Okay, we're going to make it. You don't get any, like instruments and shit. And it's like, okay, I guess we'll figure out how to like sing and make shit with our voice. Like it is adaptability. And to see, you know, and like absolutely with something like, you know, you're not going to get justice. And so how do you either make peace with that, or how do you retaliate in some way? It's just like Black people always having to like adapt and figure out, like, you're not going to get the thing that's probably deserved and earned. So
no,
like,
absolutely not.
What's second best?
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where it closes on, in a way, in the book, like how it ends, where you're just kind of like, Pilate, she never got justice for what happened to her father. She never felt like what the life she wanted to have never ended up happening. And even just going back and being like, I'll bury the bones of my father.
Yeah.
And, and just like even the very end, guitar showing up. And it's just like this cycle that's like never ending of like getting what's your, and it's like, it will never happen. Like, even the justice that, Black Americans need, it's like, it's, reparations will never be enough.
Yeah.
There's never going to be anything that's enough for the pain that was caused. And I think it's exactly what you said. It's like, how do you let that go? When do you let that go? What do you do to realize like, okay, I guess I'll never get that. What do I need instead? And how do I get it?
And looking back at Corinthians, like she's really like a real modern day lady in a lot of ways. I mean, on one hand, she's like an insufferable snob who looks down on Black people, in part because she was educated, I think, in white spaces. And it's like, if you're like educated in, a really sort of mainstream white education system in the United States, like you're not going to have like a lot of reverence or empathy for Black people. Like that's not what is taught. And so part of her attitude, and it's really similar to her father's attitude of like, we're better than these Black people, which like is something that white people also like, it's like human beings have that instinct to sort of categorize and separate. And then it's confirmed by white people. So, but when I look at Corinthians, I'm like, okay, so here was this Black girl who like, grew up nicely. She went to school, she studied abroad, and she really thought she was going to like get chose. You know what I mean? She was like, I'm like a catch, basically. She like in 2021 verbiage, she was like, I'm a catch. Like one of these wealthy men is going to want me. And then because of her, like, partly because of her own, because of her achievements, they were like, she's too elegant. Like I want like a woman who hasn't been accustomed to these things. I want.
Yeah. Every type of man would reject her for a different reason.
Exactly. And then her ultimately deciding like, I'm going to be happy. And like, I'm going to be happy with this man who doesn't seem like, he's who I should be with, or like, I'm going to take this job as a housekeeper because it actually provides me with some sense of responsibility and achievement. And
she's never had.
And it really, I was like, wow, how did you know, Toni, that this is what we need?
And it's the exact same thing now. It's like, I don't know. It feels the exact same way in some sense, where it's kind of like, oh, I do this and this and this thing, and my life will end up this way.
Yeah.
And it's like, it will still kind of like never happen.
Especially if you're Black, especially for Black people, like it really is the fallacy of like, I'm going to do all of, again, like to reference Tulsa again, it's like, we're going to do all of these correct things. We're going to build businesses and we're going to build, like we're going to have our own shit. And it's like, yeah, those were all the correct things to do. And then white people said no.
Yeah.
Like it kind of like, no matter what, like the precariousness of being a Black person in this country, like all of these decisions that, like for a character like Corinthians, if she was a white woman, you're like, oh yeah, this absolutely would have worked out for you. But you really didn't factor in the fact that you're a Black girl.
Yep. That's what it comes down to. It is, yeah. It's so crazy when she finally like accepts, like, oh, this, there's a real person who loves me, and he didn't know all these things about her. He didn't know that she studied abroad or could read this or that or be this or this person, and it was just someone who was there to love her, and her accepting that. I feel like that's like almost the only happy ending.
Well, I had like two more final things for you. But one of them was, do you think Milkman can fly? Do you think at the end he flies?
I was thinking about that because I was rereading the last bit before this, and I was like, I would like to believe he could fly.
Yeah.
I truly believe, I believe it. I believe he flew. Do you?
Yeah. Yes.
Am I dumb?
No. The metaphor of like this man having to like discover his identity and connect with his family, and like the interesting thing that she does in the book, and again, like I really would go back and read this forward because it's really again, it's short. A lot of forwards are very long, which is
Yeah,
why.
you're just like, okay, like I only have a bit of attention.
Right. But it's sort of, all of this is this, the myth of Black people flying and flying away from slavery. And like, it's sort of, the myth of Solomon. And she talks about how, with Solomon in particular, he leaves his whole family. He leaves all of his children. He is able to escape this, but he leaves all of these people behind. And I thought it's like her allowing this Black man to have this freedom, which is sort of a really beautiful thing. Like that's like him flying off and getting to like be somewhere else. And like he's sort of achieved this level of freedom. And, and we know Pilate has also like, it's something we could ascribe to her, but it's like, she's basically letting this Black man reach that level kind of at the expense of all of these other people and of Black women. And it's part of it is like, I'm like, fuck that. But it is kind of beautiful because she's allowing, it's like someone has to have that.
Yeah. And I think it's also like, it has to happen because also their family, like there is a part, oh gosh, when was it? But they're talking about like generations and how like, I think it's when Guitar is explaining his whole thing. And he's like, you kill one person, it's like a generation. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just, and I think it's like, maybe I'm like projecting too hard on her, but it's almost like, yeah, like someone in this family has to do that in a sense.
Yeah.
And it does seem like he came to like she was going to kill him, or who knows, like maybe she wasn't.
Yeah.
But like there's a reason why, in my opinion, that she probably was like, okay, let's do this, like drive me there and we'll do it. But yeah, it was, I don't know. I do think he was able to fly. I do think that kind of like magical thing happened.
I also like, to me, that's like the incredible of just like, you read Toni Morrison and it's just like stupid. It's like, this is crazy how
it's crazy how even like the most mundane interactions were just elevated.
When this book is not that long of a book, like the amount that she's able to get into this, like it would take so much more time to explain it. Even just like if you were doing like a Cliff's Notes, like it would almost take longer because she's able to just get to things in such like an economical and beautiful way that like I'm always surprised at how not long this book is. But that sort of that magical realism thing, I just love that so much in her work, because I also think like, I mean, this is going to be a real weird reference, but when I think of the ending of like Queen and Slim, which was this like very realist, I mean, like, I don't know if you've seen the movie, they died, obviously. And they have the realistic ending. Like, yeah, that is probably what would happen. The police would gun them down. But like in Black art, not to allow yourself the imagination of a different ending or of magic being able to exist, of like, because so much of, you have these stories that are so heavy and they're real things and you want to speak to them. And I think that's what she does so well, where it's like,
yes,
this book, and it's like, I get the heaviness of this situation. I get the weight of it.
It doesn't feel like a burden.
She allows for thinking Black people are magical, and she allows for to think like she has reverence for Black love. She just, it's like, oh, because she loves Black people, she can write about these terrible things that have happened to us, but she doesn't let it weigh down anything.
No.
And you don't end the book thinking about all of the pain you just, sort of borne witness to.
Yeah. And in fact, like when I finished it, I was like, I almost felt like the journey of discovery was like obviously the biggest takeaway, and just like the journey of understanding yourself and what you've come from. And it's like never, of course, it's like never going to be heavy-handed. It's Toni Morrison.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, it's exactly what you said, where it never feels like too painful or like I have to look away because there's so much pain. And I feel like that's kind of, what we have to deal with now when we consume any like real Black story, where there's just like a point where you just feel like it's almost like you're just like gonna cry no matter what. Where it's like, like even going back to something like Judas and the Black Messiah, like when I was watching, it was hard to watch in a lot of cases. And like even Queen and Slim, for as imperfect as it was, like parts of it were very hard to watch, and you did feel a lot of pain, and you felt the weight of suffering. And I do love the balance between like understanding like this is the really heavy shit people had to deal with, but that wasn't all there was to them. You know, they had these inner lives, they had these things that it was like it's like about discovery, and it's not just about pain.
I think, you know, not everyone, again, is Toni Morrison. And it's not to say that people making those movies in particular, any of this other art, don't love Black people. But there is just a different type of feeling for Black people that she had. And then also the capacity, like the ability to discuss the way that she did. And it's certainly something to strive for, but it just feels different.
It feels different also because you're like, this isn't no one, like she's not thinking about white people at all when she's making it. She's not thinking about, you know, whatever system exists that she has to write this book and how it will be received. It's like, of course, like, you know, extremely celebrated author is a part of whatever machine, but it really isn't for anybody but like Black people and herself. Like it's not here to explain Blackness or to explain like these kind of shocking concepts of why someone would, you know, be like, oh, I'm gonna, every week one of us kills a white person every day for every day of the week, and I'm the Sunday guy. And it's like not seen as this like crazy, shocking, bad thing. It's like how we've been saying this whole time. It's just like this result of someone's life and what they've experienced and the helplessness they feel. Yeah. And showing that without, you know, like, you know, she does the whole show not tell thing perfectly in the sense where you fully understand that.
She's good at writing. What can we say?
Yeah, she's the best at writing. I was like blown. Like I looked at my because I read it on an e-reader or whatever. Yeah. I looked at the stats at the end, and I was like, oh, like this took me like just under 4 hours to read because I was just like zooming through it. You know.
That's our hot take. Toni Morrison good at writing.
Yeah, who knew? Like
I have one last question for you. So today is the last day of Black History Month. Does Canada have a Black History Month?
Yeah, we do. We have it's Black History Month for us as well.
It's February also?
Yeah, it's February also. I know.
That's such bullshit. I mean, it's one thing for February is the bullshit month to have Black History Month, but then for Canada to do the same month,
it's weird because like I don't really understand Canadian Black History Month that well. Not because there's not like a wealth of, you know, amazing Black Canadians, like there clearly are, but it's just kind of like it always like recycles like the same type of thing where you're kind of like Oscar Peterson, Viola Desmond. It's really, I mean, like she was kind of Rosa Parks before Rosa Parks was.
Oh,
that's like the joke everyone makes. But anyway, she was a Black woman in a movie theater. She got kicked out, went to jail, blah, blah, blah. But it's just like, it's such a weird thing. Like, I don't really know what Canadian Black History Month is. Cause like, even in school, it'd be like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. And we're like, okay, like where are the Black Canadians?
That was really my last question. I was like, do they have a Black History Month?
We have a Black History Month, and it, I mean, like this was the perfect thing for me for Black History Month, reading this book, and also just like I did put an effort in to read more Black people for sure. But yeah, it is. We're kind of in the shadow of you guys when it comes to Black history.
I mean, you know, well,
maybe people get mad at me for saying that, but that's how it feels.
Our next fight is going to be to move Black History Month to July, because then it'll coincide with the 4th of July, which I feel like just making the 4th of July like let's remember how we got here, guys. And then also like you miss Black cookouts. I'm like, Black History Month should be a month of like parties and parades and, you know, like block parties. And so that's going to be the next. So when I successfully get Black History Month moved to July, you'll have to get it moved to July for Canada.
Yeah, I think that can happen. I mean, nothing really happens here. So it's like, what is anyone going to do in July anyway? Our national day is July 1st. Also, my birthday's in July, so it'd be an amazing time for Black history.
That's gonna be the legacy of this book club and me is getting Black History Month.
Okay, I'm gonna start the change.org petition.
Please, everyone's doing it. Sarah, I love you.
I love you, man. This was the best. You got me to read a book, and it feels amazing.
Thank you so much for chatting and reading the book. And I love that you loved the book. Like
I loved it.
That's my favorite outcome of all of these, is that people actually love the book. So Sarah's a writer based in Toronto, and she's got a lot of stuff out there, and she may push back against this, but Sarah's the funniest person writing on the internet. So go read everything she writes.
Stop. Oh my God.
I know. Happy History Month, Sarah.
Kara, thank you so much. This was the best. All right. Do I stop it now? Like,